The room is configured somewhat differently to ensure that we adhere to our 1.5 metre social distancing. Excuse me?
Excuse me,
Johnson's here.
Councillor Robson is going to be 5 minutes late.
Okay. We will, with your permission, we'll wait for Councillor Robson to get here. Thank you.
Good morning. Better.
All right, folks, welcome, John. In the interests of starting on time or thereabouts, I will declare the meeting open. The meeting is the council meeting of Tuesday, the 24th of March 2020. The meeting is being live streamed, I beg your pardon, and the video will be publicly available on YouTube. Members, could you please speak clearly into your microphones, and as always, please turn your phones to silent. Call for any apologies. There being none. We have Jaco on video conference. Jaco, welcome. Public forum none booked. Acceptance of late items. There is one late item, the report emergency provisions for COVID-19. Can I call for a seconder and a mover and a seconder to accept those? Thank you, Councillor Baldock and Councillor Hughes. All those in favour? Against? Abstentions? Carried. Thank you very much. Confirmation of the minutes. There are no minutes. Declaration of any conflicts of interest. And changes to the order of business. There is that change, of course, to accept the emergency provisions of COVID-19 report. And if we could take that first with your permission. You will see the recommendations there, serials A through to H, and we have a new resolution to insert there too, but I'll hand over to you, Coral. Thank you very much.
Good morning, thank you. So we have, in the event that you decide to implement an emergency committee, this report was written on Friday. It hasn't been updated since the PM's announcement. And so the additional recommendation that we would make is that the Council activates this emergency committee from the 24th of March, which is today, to operate during alert levels 3 and 4 of the COVID-19 emergency, and suspends all other committees, apart from the Civil Defence and Emergency Management Group, which is a joint committee with its own legislation, so you can't actually suspend that. So that is an additional recommendation which is not in your report. I'm not sure if you want me to go through any of the other provisions at this time, or otherwise I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, Coral. Are there any questions, councillors? And we're happy to accept this amendment. Thank you, Larry, and a seconder. Thank you, Kelvin. Alrighty. Yeah, all those in favour? Against? Abstentions? Carried. Thank you very much. Folks, we're at 10.1 is the adoption of the annual plan 2020-2021. Are there any questions in respect of that?
If I may, just to have the
it blown up a little bit bigger, please, Robin. This is what was sent out to us last night by you, Christine, is it?
Resolution, there's two options for resolution G. So the A to F is what was circulated last night, and G were the additional options which was requested by elected members. So choose one of those two G options.
Just a bit bigger, yeah. Report back on payment options.
Yeah, look, in the absence of Paul Davidson, Paul's at home today, I've just got a few comments which talk to changes in terms of recommendations from staff. So since Council resolved to consult on the 12.6% rate increase, including the 5% factor for debt reduction, the world has changed significantly. The need to manage our debt is as relevant today as it was when Council made the decision earlier this month, but circumstances within our community have changed to a point where the proposed increase is, in our view, not tenable or appropriate. Further, we are in communication with central government regarding the post-COVID support for communities and believe there will be an opportunity to work with central government to address infrastructure needs for the city. This has led us to the point where our recommendations to Council is to drop the 5% debt reduction component of the proposed rates increase and to stay with the business differential of 1.2 as consulted and decided through the LTP process. I also understand that there is a desire to look at options for supporting those most in need insofar as paying rates for the first quarter of next financial year, and we're happy to report back on that matter at the time Council adopts the annual plan in June.
Thank you, Marty. Are there any questions of the Chief Executive or staff? Councillor Baldock, your microphone is on.
Oh, sorry.
Councillor Robson.
Yes, it's I appreciate the conditions we're operating under, and I apologise for my lateness this morning. However, I'm concerned that there are some aspects of this that we need or should be considering this morning. I'm of a view that the movement in the commercial differential, I think while the 1.3 was part of a package I voted against, I do feel that going back to 1.2 sends the wrong signal in the light of the information we now have that underpins our understanding of the balance between residential and commercial ratepayers. There are also other aspects that in the current situation I believe we should be looking at, and one of those, for instance, is the capital adjustment. The in conversations that we've had, Paul Davidson was quite clear that the expectation that we will deliver our capital program as currently planned is highly optimistic in the current situation. The fact that the Reserve Bank have committed to the rate they have for 12 months suggests that they're looking to, they recognise the economy is not going to be heading in an upward trajectory. It's not even going to be business as usual. So I think that we should be giving some thought to the capital adjustment. And so my question is, if we reverted to the previous capital adjustment before we reduced it, what impact would that have? I don't think it's imprudent. I'm just interested to know what impact it would have. There was a, for clarity.
I'll just ask, in Paul's absence, ask the Chief Executive to respond to you.
The capital adjustment, I believe we had been using, and essentially at executive decision level, was 60 million per annum. As proposed in the current annual plan to reduce that to 20. The difference would be, I guess, the interest cost on the 40 million over a period of 12 months would essentially be the impact, or the, let's call it the upside or the benefit through this annual plan process. You can probably do the math.
The other thing to take into account is that the draft annual plan has an assumed opening debt position at 1 July 2020. That debt position could be significantly different. So we know that some of the operational revenue that we had forecast to receive this financial year we won't receive, yet the costs will continue. The consequence of that is likely you're going to have to effectively debt fund those operational costs, and we don't know yet what that will look like. So there's so many unknowns in this situation. So while your capital might be not as high next year, your actually opening debt position may be significantly higher. And so we'll still have the debt to revenue challenge potentially. We'll be in a far better position once we get to the adoption of the draft to be able to quantify some of what's occurred to date, and we may have some view of what the future financial year will be.
If I can respond, because I mean there's a discussion happening here rather than just questions being answered. There are, and I appreciate that. The issue we face is, I believe, that over the next 3 months we're effectively in some form of consultation. I know we're not striking the rate until June, as is normal practice. However, what it does is it puts a particular lever into the public debate. If we don't put that proposal in the consultation document, that lever's effectively been removed from discussion. The community doesn't get a chance to consider it, offer an opinion on it, and it's difficult to introduce that lever at late notice if one hasn't put that lever in front of the community. So this is about, to a certain extent, engaging the community. With regard to the issue around where our operating situation will be, our operating balance will be at the end of the financial year, we've already had confirmed to us that the majority of the rates are already in. A significant part of our operational income comes from rates, as most people know. That's already banked. We're not in that situation, and there will be some reduction in operational costs. There will also be some reduction in operational costs flowing from a reduction in CapEx over the next few months. There will be things that aren't happening, bills that aren't coming in on that thing. So I think my guess is it will be close to...
Point of order, Mr. Chairman. I think if we are going to go and have a discussion like this,
Do you want a motion?
we need to have a motion to suspend standing orders, because this is far beyond questions. And maybe everybody around the table wants to go into some informal discussion, but it is not right, I don't think, to just allow one member to basically put forward all his opinions and debates, which may be useful for us to hear, but we are way outside of standing orders.
All right, thank you, Councillor.
Happy to move an
Councillor
amendment.
Robson, are you happy to move a motion?
Yeah, happy to move an amendment. We've just been... Well, it's in the chair's gift, so...
Well, I'm just conscious that we haven't gone through this at all. So perhaps if we could go through it and finish the questions, and then if there's an amendment to this particular motion, you might like to make it at that point. You, Councillor Clout.
So question to Christine. You've done a few calculations, I understand, and worked out that if we want to get to a position where nobody actually gets a rates decrease in the lower value properties, that we could change the UAGC to 12.8%. So my question is, is that relatively easy to plug into the system, and even in terms of this resolution here, if we want to achieve that? Thanks.
So, so that work's been done by the finance team, so Paul and his team, but communicated through me in their absence. So that's the page that I've circulated. There's an A3 I've circulated this morning. So that's been provided by the team. That is the 12.8 UAGC option, and and it shows you the comparatives, and that basically has no ratepayer having a reduction in their overall rate. Correct. So you've got that minus 0.1. So, so that's basically saying nobody has got an overall increase. There's no one with a decrease of that 1 cent. And everyone has an increase in the 15%. There's more of a mix. So it's really about where you want to sit. So if you wanted to do this, that is something. So, and then what you would do in these resolutions is you would just add another resolution, and I could work on that to come up with some wording that would work. So this resolution is currently poised back at the 15. If you
So
want
the spreadsheet you've given us is at the 12.8
12.8, that's correct.
UAGC.
12.8
Not-
UAGC,
okay.
not the 15.
Thank you.
But 12.8,
Yes, it is
which
12.8.
has nobody with a rates reduction.
Thank you, Councillor Clout, and Christine, thank you for your answer. Councillors, any more questions? Councillor Hughes.
I'm just wondering why, I just need a little bit more explanation about what is the problem with some people at the very lower end getting a slight rates decrease.
So there's no problem. It depends on which position you wanted to take. So there was has been some informal discussion about options. So this is just another option. And on the other flip side of it, we have an alternative. So there are options for you to choose.
Okay, I thought there was some kind of financial implication or something to decreases.
So the total amount of the rate take, the total pie is the same. It's how the pie is distributed. The rates is distributed amongst different ratepayers.
Yeah,
It's totally a political decision.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Baldock.
I will be happy to move something when questions are over, but we've had so many graphs, I just kind of trying to get a handle on this if we can. This one here is the 12.8. Where do we look for the 7.6 increase with the 1.3 differential as opposed to the 1.2 and the 15% UAGC? Is there one of those that we've been supplied at some time? Because I'm
So you're talking about the 7.6 with the 1.3. That was in your agenda for the 4th of March. So that was in those options that you've already had presented to you previously. So if you go back to that agenda, there was a table that had all of the options, I think.
Yeah, Robin will attempt to bring it up on the screen.
That's coming up. If I can just ask another question. To Heidi's point, in a sense, what the 1.3 differential does is it really will push down that lower residential, as does the UAGC reduction, but it also quite exponentially pushes the commercial up. Is that correct?
Councillor Robson does have a copy of it distributed. It's apologies, normally we'd be able to turn this stuff on a dime, but not today. But I can go and photocopy this, so we could table it, so you'll all got it. So it does have, and this comes from what was presented back on the 4th, which was the 7.6 with both the options of the 15 and the 10% UAC and the differential of 1.3. So I could arrange for that to be photocopied and distributed if you'd like that.
Thank you, Christine. That would be very useful. Councillor Robson.
Could we just take 2 minutes then? Because I think having, Councillor Baldock I think has made the point, albeit indirectly, that having the discussion without the numbers in front of you is actually quite difficult. If we could take a 2-minute break, would that be?
Yes, indeed. Shall we take that 2-minute break?
Thank you.
I'm going to pass back to you now that you have these figures.
They're based on the 12.6, I assume.
6 was option 3, and option 2 was, I'm trying to remember, I think it was the 7.6. I have to go back and check it. Yes, yeah. So you ignore option 4 because that was the 17, the top end, so yeah.
So today we're discussing option 2 there at 7.6 potentially, and the UAGC of 15, if we're back to that, means the lower residential is pretty much 0. Am I reading it correctly? And yeah, righto. So, and the commercial is over here, which is UAGC of 15. The lowest is $7 and or 12% there, and the high is, you know, whatever the high is. We can't kind of fathom that one. Yeah, that's cool. Thank you very much. That's helpful. So all we would do by a further dropping of the UAGC, this one shows 10, but we come to your chart then, really, don't we, for what that looks like at 12.8. Can I ask a question then, Mr. Chairman? So if we do go with 7.6, keeping the differential at 1.2 and the UAGC at 15, can you explain to us what that does in terms of simplifying the consultation process?
Essentially, it would mean that we do not need to consult through the special consultative process, which has more stringent requirements, essentially. So it would be, in fact, arguably there would be no requirement to consult. Legal requirement, nonetheless, it's likely we would.
So we'd still be consulting, but be less. And in the document itself, it wouldn't. Would it make reference to that or not? It wouldn't. It would be taken out completely, wouldn't it?
What the ability to consult or not, or
No, the fact that whether we're consulting on the financial strategy or not would just come out of the document.
I think you still want to disclose all of that information to your community because it's still a key communication document. The question is, do you have to do a special consultative process under the Local Government Act, which requires the 1 month period and an opportunity for written and verbal submissions? That is not a step where you wouldn't need to statutory comply. You could choose to have no consultation, or you could choose to have perhaps more of a streamlined consultation approach, or you could shorten the time period. You've got some options, and given the situation, that might be appropriate. They'd be totally your call. You'd have that choice. Whereas
thank you, Christine.
Otherwise, you must do it.
I want to clarify though, if I can just finish this off, but if we didn't follow the special consultation procedure, we couldn't then in May we couldn't then drop the UAGC or shift the differential because we haven't officially consulted on it. Is that correct?
If you then wanted to shift the commercial up, if you wanted to take a move that would have a reasonable increase in the burden on a group of ratepayers, that would be difficult because you haven't consulted them and you haven't put that out for discussion. So then that's not a fair and due process.
Councillors, may I put to you that in the circumstances that we have, unprecedented as they are, that no matter where we land today, I would suggest that we need to embark on widespread consultation and get feedback from our community, even though the Local Government Act may not decree that we have to do so. I think it is extremely important that we communicate, that we consult, and that we really hear from people at this very, very challenging time. Sorry, Councillor Morris.
Thank you, and I endorse your comments there, Mr. Mayor. Sorry, preface and then question, very small preface. I'm trying to, there's something we're missing in terms of the conversation with the community. And I think if all things were equal at the moment, we'd have a lot more time to sort of go through that. We'd have a few more meetings like this, all of us together and all of our staff here, but we're just not. Within proposed resolution B, there's talks about COVID-19, but there's a statement there, while also continuing to invest in our city and meeting the infrastructure needs, etc. I'm trying to get a handle on how we communicate to our community what the quantum of that is. Now, if I was unkind, I'd call it the Weber levy or the Wellington levy, but how do we capture that and actually communicate that to our community with a number next to it? Because I guess that there's a lot of conversations going on. There's a lot of how do we communicate that to our community in an effective way?
I understand the questions there. I'll pass over to the Chief Executive, but can I just say that this issue has occupied my mind more than anything, as it should do. The opportunity that we have before us for the city is also unprecedented to take it forward, to progress the city because of the relationship with central government we've now developed and because of the funding that we'll get. At the same time, we've been hit with this dreadful plague, COVID-19, and we need to be very, very aware and conscious of the hardships that businesses and members of our community generally will be suffering at this time. And it is a dreadful dilemma. And my focus is really on the community welfare at this point. But I will pass to Marty to answer that for you.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Look, the tenor of the report that Council received earlier this month indicated our inability to raise debt to a level that could deliver on the infrastructure actually described within our long-term plan. And the three options that we gave you on that particular occasion, that meeting, was a rate increase that included a debt management levy or an enabling levy, as Councillor Clout would call it, of 10%, 5% and 0%. It's our belief that even with a 10% debt management levy that we would still struggle to be able to raise sufficient debt to deliver on the infrastructure required through the long-term plan. But essentially, the long-term plan will be set next year anyway. Certainly would have got us through this annual plan process, and it would have kept us within our debt to income ratio of 250% as prescribed by the Local Government Funding Authority. So it is still very much a real issue, and our narrative to our community, and as it has been with central government, that it is a real issue. The dilemma we find ourselves in now is obviously the affordability of our community to be able to fund that levy, as we're calling it, certainly over the next 12 months. But at the same time, we are having very, very constructive conversations with central government about what a post-COVID environment might look like. And certainly support from central government is a very, very strong consideration, certainly around developing our infrastructure that will provide for housing, transportation and the development of communities as we need them. So as recent as yesterday morning, we were having conversations with a task force that's been set up to provide advice to ministers. And certainly Tauranga and the Western Bay is considered a high priority for central government in terms of delivering housing and the infrastructure needed to support that. And so I think we are in a position where our plight is clearly identified by central government and the relationships that have been developed over the last 6 months, in my view, put us in a very, very strong position to be able to continue those discussions, certainly over the next 1 or 2 months and prior to striking a rate in June. And so we're in a situation today where we need to make a decision on what we're going to talk to our community about. We will be in a much clearer position, I would have thought, in 2 months' time and before we strike a rate, so that we don't provide or impose an impost on our community that is unreasonable in the circumstances.
Thank you very much, Marty. Any other questions, councillors? Councillor Baldock, followed by Councillor Robson.
Guys, I've been heading off Councillor Robson several times. I'm willing to defer to him for a question, and then I'll...
That's very gracious of you. Councillor Robson.
Yeah, just for clarity, and I'm standing on the shoulder of a giant. Building on Larry's question, and just for clarity, the 1.3 UAGC 15, that original option 2, 7.6, is it correct that's the one that gives the mean rates rise of 6%? That was the 1.2. Gives a mean rates rise, of 4%. So the option that effectively is in line with not changing the financial strategy, the 1.2 is already agreed in the LTP, the UAGC 15, that gives a mean rates rise, residential rates rise of 4%. Is that correct? It's on that table there.
Just for clarity, because the numbers are all, what we're talking about here is a 7.6% rates rise, the 1.2% commercial differential, and the 15% UAGC.
Yeah, there's 6 pages there, we only copied 2.
Yeah. So the option 2 is 7.6.
Yep.
And the mean, and if you're going for option 1, that's a lower level, and I can just check what the number was.
But the option, just quickly, that option 2 is 7.6. This is the UAGC 15.
Yep.
That's your 1.2 div, so your mean is your 4%, which is very close to the 3.9.
If what Councillor Robson is asserting is correct, then that is essentially the recommendation of staff today at this meeting.
Oh, the 1.2 to 15, no, it's 7%, isn't it? Sorry, it's we're just trying to check numbers and we don't all have them. It's actually 7%. Question. I'm just trying to clarify what the bases are that people are referencing. But my additional question is, can we, in the consultation document, put in issues that we've discussed, identify other possible levers without specifying our position on them? And the reason I'd like that discussed, and what I'm looking at here is reminding the capital adjustment issue, the fact that there's been a change in interest rates, the fact that we haven't gone through the CapEx program comprehensively, the fact that we haven't gone through the OpEx program, to remind people there are other levers. So when we have either input or submissions or future conversation, we haven't bound ourselves by not giving the community a chance to consider these issues. So I'm not asking to, I don't want to debate on a particular number at this stage, but can we preempt that? Is that possible? Is that legitimate?
I believe it is. I believe we can develop a consultation document and process that if council was to choose to propose a 7.6, we could put the other options in for live debate that, in my view, would enable council to change the position in June.
I mean, that would get me over the line in terms of supporting going out with
Thank you.
something.
Understand. Can I have some feedback from councillors, please, starting with the giant, Councillor Baldock?
Well, that all makes very good sense. I think, we need to communicate as much as we can in the current circumstances. If we take the staff's recommendation today, which I'm prepared to move, the only lever we're taking off the table is in May, June, when we set the final rate, that we will not be able to reintroduce any lowering of a UAGC or any increasing of a differential, because we haven't kept in the special.
I'll just get Marty to comment on
So
that, Larry. 'cause
that's what
not
I'm
sure
trying
if
to get
that's correct.
clarified.
My view, and we can confirm that, is if we consult on both of those options, that essentially it would enable council to change their current position in June.
Well, okay, but then we need to, according to Christine's email last night, we need to then reintroduce the resolution about the financial, where is it? I'm just finding it here. It's
What that
bullet
is,
point 2 there, Christine.
if you...
Revenue and financing policy amendment needs to go in.
Yep, so if you adopt something different from the 15% and the 1.2, then you need to do an amendment to the revenue and financing policy. If you leave the 15 and the 1.2, you can, and publicly consult through the special consultative process, you can change that through the consultative process, even if you didn't, and then, yep, so you could, I'm just checking with Jeremy, he's pretty good at this stuff, that's correct. So, and you'd probably just put a signal in there, in the draft document somewhere in the support information to say if there is a shift, then that would be requiring a shift through the revenue and financing policy. Am I right, Jeremy?
Yeah, the key thing in the consultation is that you need to make it very clear what your proposal is. You can therefore put your proposal, other options considered, and at this stage not proceeded with, but your key proposal, we are going out with, for instance, 15, 1.2, 7.6. That's your proposal. If you flag other things then and say, between now and June, we're also going to consider this, 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 and this, we'd like your views on the whole range, that sets you up in a good position for June to be able to do something different and then amend the revenue and financing policy at that stage.
Thank you very much. I think that gives
Happy
a
to
lot of
move,
flexibility.
Mr. Chair.
Council is reasonably comfortable with that. Are there more questions or clarification on that? So a process that gives us a great amount of flexibility. Councillor Cloud.
So just to clarify, would one of those options that we go out with, if we agree with this, is still going to that UAGC of 12.8%? Would that be one of the options that we put in there? Or do we go straight to the 10? Can we give
So I
those?
think what you need to do is you have to pass a resolution on your proposed position, which must be specific, and then we can put disclosures in to say that council also considered a 12.8. This would be the consequence of 12.8. So it's really saying here's the preferred or the proposed position, options for consideration, and we're seeking feedback on those options. So, yeah.
Are there any other questions? Councillor Bulldog.
Well, do we need that tweaked in any way now to get to a recommended resolution or not?
No, you only need to make a decision between what G,
You need to call on which G you want.
I shouldn't have done it that way. And then what we'll do is we'll take informal direction. Well, you've given us the direction you want us to disclose the options that you've considered and some information about that, and we'll just work informally with you about the document itself. But all you need in the resolution is your preferred position.
But I do think, just cutting in, just to pass the legal advisor's test, we probably need a resolution to say that we intend consulting on other options, which are not proposed at the moment, but other options to allow us flexibility in June, or words to that effect. We can wordsmith it. But I think the legal advisors would say you needed to kick this process off in March. If we kick it off by doing that, we should be fine.
Yeah, I think we can be specific, not necessarily on a number, but an adjustment of the UAGC and what that would mean and look like for our community, and likewise the differential conversation as well.
Yeah, I think before moving, I think if it was possible to have a short break to work on one further addition there, which carries the other things that John mentioned, and the range, UAGC, a range, between 15 and 10, and between 1.2 and 1.3 are things we consult on, then I think we might be ready to...
All right, Councillor Bullock, thank you for that. Is everybody comfortable that we take a break and seek advice? Jeremy, if you could assist in the advice around how we should word this. I think what we're looking to achieve here is just a greater level of flexibility in our thinking as part of the consultation process, which I think is going to be very important going forward. So how long should we take? 10 minutes, is that enough?
10 minutes,
10-minute
and
break.
we'll put this together and bring it back.
So back here at A to G, and we now have under C a change to 1 and an addition of 3. Can we have discussion and questions on that, please? Councillor Baldock.
So I understand when I move it that there may be some amendments being put forward for that will involve basically C3, where there may be amendments around the differential or around the UAGC. Am I correct on that with the way it's written? Yeah. Well, this gives us the options to go there in June, but some may want to move amendments to actually go there now in the draft, and that is the paragraph that will need amending. Am I correct?
Yeah.
So, I think sensibly so. What we're doing here is putting in a level of flexibility because we really do not know where we're going to be by June, and one would hope we're in a much better position than we are now. But let's hope. But we may not be. So this gives us a level of flexibility to look at a range of levers and options that we could adjust according with community feedback, which is going to be in consultation, which is going to be very important.
So in moving it, Mr. Chairman, if I may, I would suggest that we will take it in some parts so that we get some done that we're all in agreement with, and then the bits that need amending can be dealt with there by amendment.
All right, Councillor Baldock, you are the mover.
I'll move.
And can I have a seconder for this?
And I'm moving A to G. You can't see it.
You're moving A to G. Thank you. Do I have a seconder? We can take this in parts. Councillor Clout, thank you very much. All those in favour?
I know, we need to speak
I
to
beg your
this.
pardon.
Sorry.
Now, what are the parts that you want? So I take it A is...
If I speak, and there's many others that want to, and then anyone who's wanting to do an amendment can do it, and that's when we find out, what happens then, if I can
Right, thanks,
offer
Larry.
that assistance. So in speaking to it, I really appreciate the way we're all trying to work together here. And as you've said, Mayor Temby, this is going to give us the greatest flexibility to address the issues that are in front of us. Prior to the COVID-19, we were faced with a tsunami of issues in our city of growth and infrastructure needs and debt management challenges. And then along came COVID-19. So the world has changed and we're trying to respond. And I hope this sends a message to our community that we are listening. We know people are going through very, very hard times. And how long this will last, we don't know. So we're reducing the rate to a 7.6. Well, that is what it is. It is coming to 7.6 because we're taking out the debt management levy of 5% because future debt arrangements may change. We've had some indications from the government that they're looking at delivering packages to assist because they want to keep the economy going. They want to keep infrastructure projects going that provides jobs and so on. There's lots of benefits for that. We are adjusting in this resolution the commercial differential back to the 1.2, which is agreed to in the LTP, because it isn't just residential people who are going to be under real crisis here, it is businesses. And while I examine the government's packages at the moment, they're helping businesses keep people employed, but there's not a lot going yet to the actual owners of businesses who are left without their income as well. So I personally think pulling back on that change in the differential is worthy, but we may, at the end of this period of consultation, reintroduce it if that seems to be the right way forward. Ultimately, I'm always in favour of that reintroducing a slight change in the differential over time so that we get to what is considered the sort of norm, really, around our metro councils. But we do certainly take a lot of rate increase out of the lower valued properties, and hope that sends the right signal to our community. The other things are about the consultation document, just how effective consultation is going to be in this current climate. We don't know. Maybe the fact that everyone's sitting home and not working, they'll be writing us screeds and screeds of submissions, and we may be overwhelmed because our staff are also at home and can't process all the submissions. But be that as it may, we will welcome a community giving us their feedback and really speaking to us at this time. So I ask members to consider supporting this. It is, I think, the best we can do right now. We need to go ahead with consultation. It's part of our statutory requirements. Delaying it a little bit here and there, I think, will not help us at all. We need to get on with the job and do what we must do, which is keep our city functioning and funded. So to do that, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bullock. Councillor Cloud as the seconder, followed by Councillor Morris.
Thank you very much. On the 4th of March, when we were debating this draft initially, I said that it wasn't business as usual because we were looking at continuing huge growth, massive investment in infrastructure needs, and so here we are today, and I'm saying again that it's not business as usual, but for a different reason, of course. And so we need to recognise the severity of the COVID-19 issue. What we're doing here today is definitely softening the blow, taking the average, the rate from 12.6% increase to 7.6%. People may say that that's not enough, but we will wait to hear from them on that. I think we are easing the differential burden back from the 1.3 to the 1.2, as has already been said. I think we all realise, businesses are really going to be affected badly in the next few weeks and months. I appreciate C3, which does give us a little bit of flexibility. So we're going out consulting on our preferred option, but we are giving ourselves some room to make the necessary adjustments in 2 or 3 months' time. Of course, we did make an earlier commitment to relook at much more carefully our operational expenditure and our capital expenditure. So I would like to think that in these next few months that elected members will indeed knuckle down and use the time that we now have freed up to do that in a little bit more, with a bit more vigour and rigour. So I commend these recommendations to everyone. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Cloud. Councillor Morris.
Thank you, Mayor Temby. Yes, speaking to Councillor Clout's point, it is still too high for me. That being said, we are where we are at in the process, and ordinarily we would have quite a number of additional meetings from now on and some very robust debate amongst ourselves before adopting a draft. But the reality is that this is the last time that the entire council will meet together until after the lockdown. And so current events have not been kind to that particular process, but that's probably the least of everybody's worries at the moment. I'd also thank colleagues for the statement in there that gives us flexibility to deal with both our capital expenditure and our operational expenditure, because I think personally that we need to, as we've been sending out in press releases regarding the Three Waters, Tauranga City Council does need to focus on the essential services for the next 12 months. And that's simply responding to the very real pain that people are experiencing, and the very real worry that people feel about some anticipated pain in the future, both businesses, small business owners, and employees who may not have much of a job to go back to after the lockdown. So there's a lot more to be said on this, a lot more debate to be had, but I think we should save that till after the lockdown. I think this resolution is sufficient, gives us the flexibility to look at reductions in capital expenditure and operational expenditure. And I'd also make the point very clearly for me that this is the ceiling, it is not the floor. because in my experience, too often these things turn out to be a flaw, and things go above that. But my ambition would be that this is the ceiling. So I'm happy to support this resolution for the sake of the city just getting on with the business that we need to, but acknowledging that this is not the final figure. We will come back and we will deal with that in June after the lockdown, and I anticipate and I am looking forward to some very vigorous and well-considered debate on that. But we've simply run out of time, and we're not there yet. Okay, so I just want to make that point to the community. We are not there yet, certainly not from my perspective.
Thank you, Councillor Morris. Councillor Robson, followed by Councillor Kitty.
I'd like to move an amendment, please, which is that we amend C2 to read a uniform annual general charge of 10%, and should I get a seconder, I'm happy to speak to that, obviously.
I second that.
Really, it is a well-crafted motion. I agree with Councillor Baldock. There's been a lot of attempt to build the necessary flexibility in. I agree with what Councillor Clout said, is we still need to really explore CapEx and OpEx. But in discussions of this type, there's a concept called anchoring. Anyone who's entered into any business negotiation will understand that construct is basically your opening figure is inclined to bound the range of discussions. And if you want evidence for the damage such a concept can do if it's set the wrong way, we've always anchored previous discussions around this concept of low residential rates, which, as we've learnt over the past few months, maybe this triennium, learnt more than any previous triennium, that anchor was never correct, and that's put us in a bad place with regard to effectively the lack of revenue we have as a council, the commercial rates being far too low. What I want to do is to make sure that I'm comfortable with the anchor point that we go out to the community with, which effectively is what we're proposing. And in that regard, I believe the right anchor point for a discussion with our community should be a UAGC level of 10%. That's why I'm proposing it.
Thank you, Councillor Robson. Councillor Hughes.
Just wanted to, also recognising that we are in the situation that we're in, and that we're all very much aware and our ears are open to the community at this time, and where we sit in 2 months from now. But I agree with the amendment in that the document we go out with is what people will see and base their understanding on. And I believe, in my view, that the UAGC should be at 10% to reflect where we need to go in the future for our city.
Thank you, Councillor Hughes. Councillor Baldock.
Just a point of clarification, if I may, to Christine Jones or to the Chief Executive. The email you sent us last night said, we have removed the revenue and financing policy amendment resolution as it is not needed if it's 15 things. So if this was to pass, we would need to put that back in, would we not?
That's correct. And
No.
I can just send it to Robin. So
But no big drama if
it's no big
putting
drama.
it back in, really, so it's
So
fine.
it would come in after D. So I'll draft up a resolution to put into D if this amendment's successful.
I suggest that the mover of the amendment includes that, because it does, in effect, have to come if it's passed. So it would be your amendment to 2 and then an amendment to bring that amendment to the revenue and financing policy.
And just for clarity, we are then back into the special consultative procedure process. Not that I think it's going to make much difference if you're intending to consult anyway, but just to let you know.
Thank you. Any other questions? Thank you, councillors, for your input into what has been a very good process, and thank you also for taking into account the community issues at this time. And I think we're all feeling it. I've certainly had some very sleepless nights worrying about the opportunity we have for the city, but also having to take account our okay. Right. Sure. Oh, Yako.
Than the likes of Port and Zespri and maybe the bigger companies that likely have better balance sheets. So yeah, I think the UAGC lowering it is a good idea.
Thank you, Councillor Arbery. Are there any more questions? All right, councillors, I put to you this motion. I beg your pardon?
Do the amendment first.
The amendment first, I'm sorry, which is amendment C3,
Is that the uniform annual
C2, sorry. As discussed, as put forward by councillors Robson and seconded by councillor Hughes, commercial differential of 1.2 and the UAGC of 15% as per in the long-term plan. And the amendment, of course, at 10%. All those in favour? Against? Abstentions? Carried. Was unanimous. Can we do this again? This is the amendment to C2, where the UAGC proposed at 10%. All those in favour? Can I just see a show of hands? Yako, thank you very much. So it is unanimous. Thank you. Under the consequence of having revised this amendment on a number of occasions, can we put the amendment in one together? Can I put it to you in one block, or do you still want it taken in parts, given that we have revised and reworded it on a number of occasions? If there are no other amendments. Yes, indeed, Yako.
That the most important
Thank you, Yako. Councillor Kitty.
Great. So first of all, I'd also like to thank our colleagues and the TCC staff for revisiting this draft document. I'm also happy for it to go, the draft to go to public consultation. However, I'm not committing to any resolution as definite, as we are unaware of what COVID-19 may present us. And I'm also aware that Auckland, Wellington and Christchurch are also revisiting rates, along with the Reserve Bank's informal conversation this morning. I feel we may be morally obliged to follow suit if our residents, ratepayers and businesses need further assistance in these challenging and uncertain times. My priority is to serve the community as a whole, and with businesses and commercial operations shutting doors tomorrow, I don't think anybody here can imagine the full impact or implications of what a nationwide lockdown on our family, whānau, friends and community will have. We must go back to the basics and reprioritise what is truly important for all of us in society. I will need to know exactly what the money will be spent on and what our community, through our engagement process, deems necessary. Thank you.
Councillor Kitty, are there any more questions or discussions? All right, councillors, just one thing. You'll see there in green, in E, can we also adopt that as part of the substantive motion? Happy to do that. Are there anybody opposed to doing that? All right, well, I'll put to you then the motion all in one block, if I may. Councillor Baldock?
No, I'll forego any right of reply.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Cloud? All right. All those in favour? Can I just see a show of hands? Councillor Arbery, Robson, Kitty, it is unanimous, in fact, and from me as well. Thank you very much, councillors. Job well done. We're moving on to 10.2, adoption of the draft 2021 Development Contributions Policy. Do we have staff that would like to talk to this? Thank you, Christine.
So the development contribution policy just takes the capital projects that are proposed and identifies the charge that's going to go for each individual area. You'll see in there, in the actual document, there's a summary of the key changes, and we're also signalling, as we've presented previously to, I think it went to PSOC, that we're signalling an increase in the water citywide charge when Waiari comes on stream. So a fairly standard process, and it's a direct consequence of the capital program.
Thank you, Christine. Any questions? Councillor Robson, happy to move. Can I have a seconder? Councillor Robson, would you like to talk to that, please?
Yeah, just quickly. I mean, misunderstood by many, not understood by quite a few. The development contributions policy is critical to the funding of growth infrastructure. Unfortunately, thanks to central government legislation, it doesn't pick up all the bill, but it picks up a significant amount of it. And it's the work to get this right is significant for our council staff. And generally speaking, in my experiences, they get it right more often than they get it wrong. And so I commend not just the policy, but the work behind it, the successes of the past, and hopefully we continue to improve so we get closer to the developers paying their share.
Councillor Robson. Councillor Baldock.
Yeah, I'll just add a few brief words, but as Councillor Robson has said, the work that goes into getting this document together, you see how big it is, and the estimates of what costs are going to be over time is very, very challenging. And just in the hope that the government might be listening to our debate today, live streaming, I might make a plea also that after we get through this crisis, they might review the legislation to allow us to put in a 10, 15, 20% kind of contingency amount, so that when we find in a few years' time that costs have gone up and we don't get enough recovery, it doesn't fall on the ratepayers to fill that hole. It's something that's been going on for 20 years really, and everyone's done their best to try and not have it happen, but it still does. So, and I certainly believe DCs do make a huge contribution to the costs of growth, and without it we would be, putting a lot more on our ratepayers. But please, government, if you would pay attention to that at some point. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Baldock. Any other councillors? Thank you. I'll then put the motion to you, and all in one block, A through E. All those in favour? Aye. Anyone against? Any abstentions? Carried unanimously. Thank you, councillors.
So at this point, as I assume the chair, I would suggest we have our morning tea break, 15 minutes, and then come back for the 10.3 if that's possible. All right, thank you, members. We will reconvene council meeting, and we are addressing 10.3, the Code of Conduct complaint. I note that councillors Hollis and Kitty are not present because they are affected parties and haven't returned, so that's fine. We have the Mayor present at the moment only because he will make comments to us in a minute. But first of all, the purpose of the report is to consider an independent investigation of the Code of Conduct, the Code complaint, and determine whether a breach of the Code has occurred and what further action will be taken. First of all, I will move the recommendation that the Council receives the report, Code of Conduct complaint, and notes the findings of the independent investigation to enable to get us underway. I'll move that. I'll have a seconder. Thank you, Councillor Salisbury. I won't speak to it. I'll put that. All those in favour, please say aye. Thank you. Against? That's carried. Now, the next part of our procedure is that I'll ask the Chief Executive to speak to the report, and then I will invite Mayor Temby to make his comments to us. Thank you, Chief Executive.
Deputy Mayor, look, I'll take the report as read. I'm satisfied on the basis of legal advice and guidance throughout this process that the investigation, the compilation of the report and the recommendations are in accordance with the Code of Conduct, and so it's really up to you now, Mr Deputy, to initiate the proceedings and the discussion, and the resolutions are there for you to consider.
Thank you, Chief Executive. Just before inviting Mayor Temby to speak in response, I just should check, is there any other elected members who feel they are affected parties in this and wish to exclude themselves? If there are not, then we'll proceed, and I will invite you, Mayor Temby, to make your comments in regard to this investigation and complaint.
Thank you, Deputy. To my fellow councillors and our staff, I admit I made a mistake. I accept it was wrong, and I have apologised, and I do so here again to you all, and the community. It's important we get through this distracting sideshow and get back to the important issues of serving, caring for and leading our community at this very challenging time. I concede my demeanour was influenced to a large degree by a complete lack of trust in Councillor Hollis, caused by his continual untrustworthy behaviour and social media activity, and I considered this to be incompatible with our responsibilities as elected representatives of the community. While I will defend free speech, I will never resile from confronting hate speech and the hurt it creates to many members of our community. Councillor Hollis's comments to the investigator were to the effect that I have not given him an opportunity to discuss his views on the Treaty of Waitangi and clear the air, and that he is offended by my calling him a racist. I would point out that many other people in the community have used exactly this rhetoric around Councillor Hollis's comments, and the burning of the treaty as being overtly racist, New Zealand's Race Relations Conciliator included amongst them. Holding a figurative cigarette lighter up to the Treaty of Waitangi, hanging on this very wall in chambers, after publicly stating the treaty should be burnt, is reprehensible to me and totally unacceptable. Let's be very clear about our relationship with iwi. There is very little we can move forward with in the Western Bay of Plenty without a partnership with iwi. I have worked hard to build a partnership and developed a trusted relationship where one did not previously exist at this level with Tauranga City Council, as evidenced by the speed that the Moao base track was repaired after languishing for nearly 3 years. It is interesting to me that I'm censured, and rightly so, for what was a one-off lapse, while months of disruptive and inappropriate social media activity by another council member have not drawn any direct civic criticism. This reflects a divided council, and I believe it's essential that we now find a constructive way to work together, particularly at this time of crisis. Having worked diligently to develop trusted partnerships and therefore having proved my commitment to working as an aligned team with our regional partners, the Western Bay of Plenty District Council, the Bay of Plenty Regional Council and iwi together with central government. My abject frustration is the damage that is done to Divide TCC has been its historical nemesis. It needs to stop. So I repeat my apology, and you all have my assurances it will not happen again. Now let's get on with serving our community who desperately need our leadership at this very challenging time. Thank you, Deputy.
Thank you, Mayor Temby. Just pause as the Mayor leaves the room. Now, I have indicated to you, my colleagues, that I would now move E, and I shall move that we determine to concur with the findings of the independent investigation that the subject of this complaint did constitute a breach of the Code of Conduct. Do I have a seconder for that motion? I do. Thank you, Councillor Salisbury. I'll now speak to that, and then others, of course, will have the opportunity to speak to, amend or whatever. But in speaking to it, I think it is clear the investigation has been thorough, and again, we've just heard from the Mayor that there's no denial in terms of what he said. And the situation is there. He has put it in some context. I think it has been a very bad lapse of our Mayor. It's not something I've witnessed before in my years of involvement in local government. And it is important, I think, that we do agree with the investigation and the confirmation that this is a breach of the Code of Conduct. We could not all behave this way. But I think even the investigator does make reference in his concluding comments that there has been some mitigating circumstances around the actions of Councillor Hollis, particularly with the incessant and ongoing media posts which are not acceptable. So he does say it is his view that there has been a likely contribution to that response, but however, this does not excuse the behaviour that has occurred. So I will leave it at that with my comments. Seconder, Councillor Salisbury may wish to speak. Thank you, Councillor Salisbury.
So I would just like to say that as someone who has experienced violence and aggression towards me in my past, I'm very aware of the impacts of this behaviour. It is not something that I want to experience or witness in my workplace. So regardless of the cause, it is unprofessional behaviour from someone in a leadership position in the city. And my hope would be that all derogatory comments towards or about other members of council, whether in person or on social media, would stop. Even though we won't always agree with one another, my hope would be that we would behave respectfully. If we allow someone to post derogatory remarks against any other EM on our social media, and we don't remove them, I believe we are complicit in disrespectful behaviour, which is in our Code of Conduct. We have work to do, and our city needs us to have cool heads and to be respectful of one another and lead our city through such uncertain times. And I think that we probably all need to step it up with respectful behaviour.
Thank you, Councillor Salisbury. Other speakers? Councillor Clout.
Thank you. I'm going to save my speech really till the next part of the discussion. If this is a new C, isn't it, rather than E? So
That's
if
correct,
this
yeah.
C is passed, I do have a proposed D and E, which I'll speak to at that point. But thank you. I think we're on the right track.
Thank you, Councillor Clout. Other speakers? Councillor Morris.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's disappointing that we're here today to be considering this. But the simple fact is that when any of us puts ourselves forward for leadership, and I think probably especially the role of mayor, which is the head of the city in a ceremonial sense as well, that there's a higher level expected from the community in terms of behaviour, maybe a higher level than what we may be used to doing in our own personal lives or whatever. But the simple fact is that those who put themselves forward as leaders will be judged by the community more harshly than individuals in the community. That being said, I don't think there is a workplace in Tauranga which would accept the behaviour we're discussing today in any way, shape or form. And so I think we're left with no choice, unfortunately, to uphold the complaint. And we'll discuss next steps in terms of penalty. I would have hoped that the Mayor would have apologised to Councillor Hollis, but especially Councillor Kitty, because Councillor Kitty has done nothing wrong. She was vilified in that meeting. And I've gone through social media posts, I can't find anything she's done that's wrong. And the attack on her, as a man, as a husband, as a father of daughters, is not something that I can tolerate in our workplace, and not from our leader, who I believe can do better. I know he can do better. He's an incredibly capable man. He can do better. I would have hoped that apology would have been forthcoming today, especially in the light of much more serious events going on out there in our community. I think that would have been really good leadership, and I'm really, really disappointed that Amir didn't do that today, didn't step up to that. He can do better. He can do better. I know he can. I'll just leave it at that, and then we'll obviously discuss penalty. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Morris. Any other speakers at this point? Councillor Hughes.
I also agree in this case. We can't have aggression or a misuse of power, really, that can be used in these situations, and we have to be really clear and across the board with behaviour, and this behaviour was not conducive to a workplace. So I'm in agreement on this.
Thank you, Councillor Hughes. I won't exercise the right of reply at this stage. If there are no other speakers, I will put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Oh, sorry, I haven't checked with Councillor Arbery. Apologies, Councillor Arbery. Do you wish to speak? Okay, thank you. I will put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? There are no against, so that is carried unanimously. And now I'll ask members if we would go to paragraph 12 of our report, where we deal with the process for considering the investigator's report. We've been through the acceptance of it. We have confirmed that there has been a breach, and we now give our attention to a range of measures that can be taken, bearing in mind that we've had legal advice about some which are really not enforceable and therefore probably not worth considering. And I will open now for any motion in that regard, and I know you have indicated, Councillor Clout. I'll give you the first.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I have emailed to the committee advisor and now also to all elected members proposed D and E, and if we can put that up on the screen, and I will read it out so that people who are watching can follow along. So I've got here D, and this is talking about council. Council determines that the following penalty be instigated. The respondent, which of course in this case is Mayor Temby, the respondent of this complaint shall by Friday the 27th of March 2020 write 4 separate letters of apology to the following persons. 1. Councillor Andrew Hollis. 2. Councillor Dawn Kitty. 3. Remaining elected members. And 4. All Tauranga City Council staff. And then E,
Council retains the right to invoke additional penalties should Resolution D not be enacted by the respondent. And I'm happy to talk to that.
Okay, I will just like to check that if I can, because it's a little bit of a merging of what is covered under paragraph 12 and 13. I'd just like to check that it is valid, because 13 says it may decide that a penalty will not be imposed where a respondent agrees. So we get under that.
It's
under
paragraph
that category.
12.2.
Yeah, I think you can, under 12.2, and I'll seek some legal advice, I know we have it here, but under 12.2, you can make a request that they make an apology, but to make the request for an apology then subject to additional penalties, I wonder if it is taking us then into 13, and I just want to check advice from the Chief Executive or legal advice, please. It may need to be split into two parts, but hanging some kind of further punitive action over it is what I'm trying to clarify.
Well, I think D is fine. The ability to enforce that or otherwise, in my view, I don't believe exists. And so E becomes redundant in my view.
I'm happy to remove E if that, because I mean D is the substantive clause, so I'm happy to remove E if in fact the Chief Executive is right and that we don't have any actual power to enforce any penalty.
Yeah. So you'll remove E. Seconder for that motion. Without E, is there a mover for just the D of that? A seconder, sorry, of that. Yes, question, Councillor Morris.
Apologies, I seek your indulgence. Just wanting to question 2 and 4. We've heard from the Mayor today a verbal apology, which is recorded for posterity. So personally, as an elected member, I wasn't actually at that meeting, but I personally wonder if that's actually been discharged, and I wonder from the Chief Executive's perspective whether the apology that the Mayor gave has discharged an apology to Tauranga City Council staff. So I just wonder whether we actually need 3 and 4. I wonder whether those duties have been discharged.
I think in response to that, I think it is important that the Chief Executive inform us about what apologies may have been given to those who were present in the room at the time, which may inform.
So certainly all of the general managers and the majority of the staff that were present have been apologised to. I'm satisfied from an organisation perspective that the matter is essentially has been addressed in terms of an apology.
I also feel, sorry.
So can I speak to it and then, if there's a seconder, and then amendments can be made or deletions made?
We don't yet have a seconder, so we're at that point. At the moment, the motion is still 1, 2, 3 and 4. Is it Councillor Clout? Or are you going to amend
If I
that?
do not get a seconder, clearly I will alter the resolution, but I would like to have a seconder and then we can debate it.
Seconded by Councillor Salisbury, so you may now speak to it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. So we're all here sitting in this quasi-judicial chair, effectively, and I'm very keenly aware that each one of us have to work with Mayor Tenby after today's meeting, and we have to relate to him on both a professional and a personal level. So in proposing these recommendations, or this recommendation, I believe I'm doing so with a clear head, with a rational and objective manner. So I just want to prefix my statement by saying that. Now, some may ask us, why are we spending time on this issue now? We've got much better things to talk about. Now, first of all, I just point out that this is not actually taking us a lot of time, so let's just put that in perspective. But I believe it's vital that in leading the city forward, we have leaders who do have a clear head and can lead rationally. I was a witness of that unsavoury incident, as were many of my colleagues, and it was immediately clear to me that the Mayor had in fact crossed the line with his, we would call it an explosive outburst. Now, of course, you could argue there are some mitigating factors. The Mayor works some very long hours, and also there were some incendiary Facebook posts by Councillor Hollis, so there's no denying that. But I still think that that's no excuse to explode in such an aggressive manner. Now, he may have genuinely been very hot under the collar when he stood up to remove his jacket, but unfortunately that was not a good look in the circumstances. Now, whilst in today's society the use of expletives is quite pervasive, I'm not comfortable with the ferocity of the language used by the Mayor, and I believe it was unbefitting of the office of the Mayor. I have counselled the Mayor not to take to heart much of what is written on social media, and also understand the reality that politics is often a combative environment, and that democracy serves up sometimes fellow elected members that we do not always agree with, and often will have diametrically opposed views. So I think we all need to learn to take the challenges and even some of the insults on the chin, and do our best to find common ground as we lead this beautiful city forward. A good leader will handle people disagreeing with their views, and we must remember that freedom of speech is a fundamental tenet of democracy. I did hear the Mayor just speak just right now, saying that we are a divided council. But as has just been demonstrated through our previous resolutions around the annual plan, that we can come from views diametrically opposed, but when it comes to the crunch, we can actually be united when it comes to the decisions that matter for the city. I believe it's important to get the level of penalty commensurate with the level of the offence, and looking at all the other penalties available to us in paragraph 12, I would not feel comfortable imposing any of them at this point. I wanted to add some words around the apology being sincere and acceptable to the people receiving the letters, but that becomes too subjective, clearly. How do we actually know that? But I believe the Mayor will choose his words carefully and with sincerity. So I think we find ourselves in this difficult position, but I believe it's important that we do request a written apology from the Mayor to those 4 people. Persons. The reason I've included elected members is that he is the leader of the team, and although his remarks were primarily aimed at Councillor Hollis and Dawn Kitty, Councillor Kitty does affect all of us as elected members. The reason I've put in subclause 4, all Tauranga City Council staff, is that we are here in a public domain. And so it wasn't just the staff that were in the room at the time that were affected. I believe it has affected, all of us and all of our staff. So just very finally, I'd like to finish with a scripture. It says in Psalm 133, "How good and pleasant it is when brothers dwell together in unity, for there the Lord commands a blessing." Now, this is a very big ask, and I understand that. But for the sake of the city, I do pray that the Mayor and Councillor Hollis and Councillor Kitty can at least agree to disagree, or disagree without being disagreeable, and focus on making the very best decisions for the benefit of Tauranga Moana. Thank you very much. Appreciate that.
Thank you, Councillor Clout. Before I ask the seconder to speak, there is some advice from our legal advisor that we may need to amend your resolution to being simply a request to apologise. Sorry, can I have you can speak to that, please, if you could, Chief.
Yeah, so if we're relying on 12 to essentially the wording should reflect section to. So simply request the respondent make a written apology to.
Thank you. I'm very happy to make that amendment, but I also just add that the reason that I haven't pre-socialised this ahead of the meeting was because we were given advice that we weren't to come here with any sort of predetermination or agreement amongst ourselves. That's why it's fresh off.
That's
Fresh off. Thank you.
acceptable, Councillor Clout. Let's just pause while we change this. In other words, we can't put, by Friday 27th, write 4 separate if it's just... because then I think one way forward, if as we vote, we may take in parts 1, 2, 3 and 4. Some may be prepared to support 1 and 2 and others may not support 3 and 4. So we'll just get the amended wording done. Is that a question, Councillor Salisbury? Well, you're the seconder of the motion, so someone else could amend that, but we haven't. We'll just get this wording first, and then we'll entertain amendments. For expediency's sake, if you wish to make it that amendment and you had the approval of the mover, you could change it, Councillor Salisbury, otherwise it would fall back to someone to amend. So there's no agreement there. So then, Councillor, the next to speak as the seconder, you can waive that for now, and okay. Yep, so an amendment from Councillor Morris, I believe.
Just speaking to the amendment rather than the substantive,
your amendment.
With your indulgence, I would seek to amend that we remove 3 and 4, and if there's a seconder, I'll speak to why.
Is there a seconder for that? I believe so. Seconded by Councillor Hughes. Speaking to it, Councillor Morris.
I think that the Mayor's apologised to elected members, or the remaining elected members already in the chair in the chair over there, so I think that's discharged. And the Chief Executive speaks on behalf of Tauranga City Council staff, and he's accepted that, and so I think that is discharged. We don't need to consider those, in my view.
Okay, Councillor Hughes is the seconder.
Yes, I agree in that case, and I also believe that we now need to really focus on the crisis ahead of us, and that causing more of a distraction by going out to our whole council now just takes our eye off the ball.
Thank you. Any other speakers to the amendment? Otherwise, I'll put the amendment. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? 1, 2. Okay, so that is all those in favour of the amendment. Councillor Salisbury, Councillor Morris, Councillor Hughes, Councillor Baldock and Arbery. Are you yes in favour? And against? Councillor Granger, Councillor Robson and Councillor Clout. So that is carried. 5 votes to 3. So now we can speak to the amended motion. Councillor Salisbury, do you wish to exercise as the seconder of the motion, do you want to use your speech now?
I just want to clarify as well, I thought we had taken E off as it wasn't allowed. It's been taken off. Okay, no, I'm good.
Yes.
Councillor Clout. Just one question. In regards to a written apology, had you not thought of maybe an apology to Councillor Hollis and to Councillor Kiddy in a formal council meeting? And why I ask that is that the apologies, no, listen to me.
Sorry, Councillor Granger, I think this is getting to somewhere you may make an amendment, but not proposing this to the mover of the motion. So if you wish to amend it to be...
I don't want to amend it, I just want to ask him, and I'm sure that's appropriate to do. Why I'm asking that is that Mayor Tenby has apologised verbally to the staff, verbally to the elected members, and I just wondered why it has not been the same to the two councillors as well, in a verbal rather than a written. I just wanted to ask that question.
Okay, well, you've asked, and now the answer from Councillor Clout.
It's pretty obvious. When something is writing, in my view, it has a lot more weight. So, and it gives the mayor opportunity to very carefully weigh his words.
So you may speak to the motion now, Councillor Granger, if you wish. No? Any other speakers to the motion? Councillor Hughes.
I just also wanted to add at this point that I don't agree that we should take on the chin underhanded words on social media. These comments are damaging to our ability to work as a team and for the best interests in our city, and I think that we need to also recognise that that Councillor Hollis has been implicit in building to the place that we got to today by incessantly doing that. So I think that we all need to look to go forward here and move on as a team together.
Councillor Morris.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to reiterate that we didn't have to be here today discussing this at this crucial time. It was totally within the Mayor's gift to apologise to Councillor Hollis and Councillor Kitty, and I emphasise the last point, and Councillor Kitty. And I earnestly would have hoped and actually would have thought that he would have stepped up in the interests of the city at this time. Let's just, come on guys, let's raise the flipping level here. Ordinarily I would be in the least restrictive censure possible camp, because I think that's the way that you should approach quasi-judicial proceedings. And so that's why I've amended to get rid of 3 and 4 as well, because I think they were unnecessary. But in terms of, Councillor Hollis and Councillor Kitty, there are just so many, unfortunately, there are just so many aggravating factors that actually force us to require an apology. Maybe even a censure, if I can put that on the table, because the aggravating factors are as follows. Basically, but let me say at the outset, and I'm sure Councillor Hollis is listening, Councillor Hollis's previous comments before the election regarding the Treaty of Waitangi, I find them absolutely abhorrent to the core of my being. I utterly condemn them. But he is free to exercise his freedom of speech, and that's the country that we live in. That said, this whole thing was not about the Treaty of Waitangi or Councillor Hollis's previous comments, which have been referred to as racist. It wasn't. The context of that meeting was a discussion on consulting on a 12.6% rates rise. Now, both Councillor Hollis and Councillor Kitty have been vocal in their opposition to that. And when the Mayor had his outburst, for me, this racism thing is a red herring. It really is. So another aggravating factor is the fact that this has been prosecuted through the media. The Mayor has assassinated the character of Councillor Hollis through the media, and that's an aggravating factor. It absolutely is. This has got nothing to do with Councillor Hollis's, in my personal view, perhaps racist comments. No, this is about the outburst that occurred in that room over there over a rates rise, and about sticking to being one team and communicating that collectively. So it's just a real red herring. That's a really aggravating factor. So again, attacking Councillor Hollis through the media during this process, when in my view all parties should have been silent and allowed the process to take its course, another aggravating factor. For me, the biggest aggravating factor is actually the statements that the Mayor made in the investigation about Councillor Kitty. Councillor Kitty has done nothing wrong. Those comments I found, as I said before, as a dad, as a husband, were absolutely flippin' chilling. Okay, we're in 2020. We cannot create an unsafe workplace for our women here. That was nothing short of bullying in my view. That's as strong as I'm going to get on it, but we just can't do that. So those are the aggravating factors. If the Mayor had apologised to Councillor Kitty and Hollis That's it. We've got nothing to discuss. But he chose a deliberate choice not to do that. Racism, red herring. It's a distraction. It's an absolute distraction in my view. What happened and the facts of the case as reported by the investigator. And the assassination of Councillor Kitty's character, you know, in that document I found absolutely chilling because there was no justification for it whatsoever. And to that end, and because of that, I would move an amendment that in addition to D, one, we issue a letter of censure to the member because I think that is an aggravating factor. We didn't have to be there, so that is an amendment from me that we write a letter of censure to the Mayor over that. We cannot tolerate that in 2020.
Well, sorry, Councillor Morris, just clarifying what you are doing there. Are you moving an amendment?
It's moving an amendment that we write a letter of censure to the member.
Take a moment to check standing orders on that. Thank you. We'll just take 2 minutes to check. Just pause our transmission for a few minutes while we check standing orders. It's basically around the issue of whether Councillor Morris can move another amendment after having moved an amendment, that amendment being carried and now being in the middle of speaking to the substantive motion. So we're just checking standing orders and we will come back with the live stream in just a moment once we have that sorted. Thank you. We are back again. Thank you for those watching by live stream. Our staff have confirmed that it is possible under standing orders for Councillor Morris to move another amendment. So he has moved the amendment to add basically what is in the report, item 12.1, which is a letter of censure to the member. Do I have a seconder for that motion? Robson seconded it. Now you may speak to it, Councillor Morris.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think the text needs to be just simple. It just says that, you know, this behaviour is unacceptable, Tauranga City. Yeah. But it needs to be there, as I say. This sets the standard for workplace behaviour in the city, because it just does. Unfortunately, in leadership, that's what people expect of you. So I think that's the bare minimum.
Thank you. Just before I take the seconder's speech, I'll just read the definition from a dictionary somewhere. What censure means, just so it's not a word we commonly use today, but it has been used frequently legally. It means express severe disapproval of, in brackets, someone or something, especially in a formal statement. So that is what will be happening. Councillor Robson, do you wish to speak to it?
I'll keep my comment short. I haven't yet spoken to the substantive motion, but I'm conscious that I said I'd keep my comment short. I will reserve my fuller comments for the substantive motion. However, I am conscious that the request for an apology cannot be enforced, and should it be declined, the invitation to apologise be declined, the matter would end there. And in the light of statements that the Mayor has made that he will not apologise to Councillor Hollis, I fear that this may be a somewhat Pyrrhic motion, and it is for that reason that I believe we should support this amendment. Now, the point I'm making very clearly is that the Mayor has stated unequivocally and more than once that he will never apologise to Councillor Hollis, and in that regard, should this motion be passed, it may be a Pyrrhic, it may be a statement that has no value and carries no weight, whereas a letter of censure is an active decision by this organisation to make a statement about behaviour, and that's why I'm supporting the motion. It does beg the question about when we look at our code of conduct and revise it for this triennium, which we haven't yet done, we need to give consideration to some elements of it, I believe. It should have and carry some weight.
Thank you, Councillor Robson. Other speakers to the amendment now? Amendment only. Councillor Arbery, do you wish to speak to the amendment?
I think the letter of censure is sensible because it makes clear what behaviour was unacceptable and might give the Mayor a few things to fix it.
Thank you. Councillor Clout.
Thank you. I certainly agree with the amendment. I believe we need to make a very clear statement of what behaviour is acceptable and what is unacceptable, and I think this letter of censure will reinforce that point. I guess I have a question of you, Mr. Chair, is who writes the letter and who is it from?
Yeah, we can prepare a letter and it would be signed by the Deputy Mayor on behalf of councillors.
Thank you. I think that's appropriate. Thank you.
Any other speakers to the amendment? If not, I will put that. All those in favour, please say aye. Against? That is carried. That's unanimously carried. So we come back now to speak to the substantive motion, which now is a letter of censure, and it is to Councillor, the apology is to be to Councillor Hollis and Kitty. further speakers who have not spoken to the substantive motion is Councillor Morris. And you have already, yes. And those who haven't is Councillor Granger, myself, Morris, and Arbery, I believe. Councillor Morris, your turn. Robson, your turn.
It weighs heavily, this type of conversation, and I've made it my business, as I think it is, to reflect and also take effectively soundings via what's in the public domain on this topic. I'm not comfortable with the mitigation arguments that have been put forward. I'm conscious of one in particular which was cited by Campbell Gourlay in the report, which was the posting of some remarks, and beneath it the posting of a media report. I'm conscious that the causal chain for these discussions is quite long. I believe that people choose where to start looking, normally to line up with their ideological or preconceived positions. I think we were advised, and I have some sympathy with the view by a former councillor, Max Mason, that we make decisions on emotion and then use our intellect to find their rationalisation. There is a degree of that here, I think. We need to be clear that the Mayor, having made the remarks, has stated that he did so intentionally, that he does not resile from them, that he will not apologise. For me, that's unfortunate, because I concur with the view of Councillor Morris that should the Mayor have offered an apology, this would not be an issue. We would have moved from here. I'm conscious that our code of conduct does expressly allow for a councillor to make public a view that's in contradiction to the council position. They cannot pretend it is the council position, but they have the right to hold a contrary view. I'm conscious of work done by academics at Massey that effectively describe our code of conduct as quite chilling in regard to its insistence that people, sort of toe a line. And I'm concerned about that. We do need to allow full and frank debate. Having been a topic on social media at various times, it's not a place I play very often, for obvious reasons, that I have better things to do. But having been a topic in various posts and conversations, I find that I take on board the practice of Councillor Clout. I accept that there is a conversation to be had, and that my job is to rise above that, to not react personally. For me, the biggest aggravating factor in this is, I believe, the switch of focus from behaviour of the Mayor to the belief, perhaps not totally accurately represented, of a councillor. And it's called a code of conduct for a reason, that your beliefs are your beliefs, and you're entitled within the bounds of the law and the Bill of Rights Act to express them in any way, shape or form that does not constitute hate speech. That shift concerns me greatly. The focus here is one of conduct, it's one of behaviour. The behaviour is accepted unanimously as being unacceptable. The request to write an apology is, I hope, one that will be acknowledged and, as I say, the invitation taken up by the Mayor. But I do think, in addition to that, the censure is important. So I support the motion as it stands. I circle back to the point that I'm not confident that 1 and 2 will be taken up by the Mayor, unfortunately, hence the censure. There are, I believe, aggravating factors. I can cite additional factors if people are looking for them. An interview with Karen Hay, where the Mayor said he had apologised to all concerned. And I don't believe that was an accurate representation of the situation when that statement was made. It takes courage to admit you're wrong. Now, that's a word that's been bandied about in this chamber, I think, unfortunately, and one would argue that that's part of that causal chain that's now being argued in mitigation. It takes courage to admit you're wrong. It takes greater courage to apologise to those people you've wronged. And I would urge my colleagues to vote for this motion, and I would urge the Mayor to take courage. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Robson. Do we have further speakers from Councillor Arbery? Or yes?
Yes, I think for this situation, I just want to echo what Steve has said, that Dawn hasn't done anything wrong, and she's being tarred by this almost racism brush by people in the public because of comments that the Mayor is making in the media about Dawn and Andrew being tied at the hip. So I don't think that's fair. On the comments that Andrew made on social media, I mean, particularly around the treaty, those were wrong. And I don't think Andrew will mind me saying that, but in a conversation with him, he told me that he regretted those comments. So when we have, I suppose, the Mayor aggravating that situation and having an outburst, that's pulling down the house. So yeah, I think it would be good if people would take courage, as John says. I think it would be good if Andrew apologised for his Facebook post, but in particular, I think the Mayor owes Andrew and particularly Dawn an apology for his behaviour on that day. Yeah, so I don't think we can be too prescriptive on any punishments because we can't enforce anything, and it also feels a little bit like a parent telling one of their kids to apologise, the other one, the kid reluctantly does it, but doesn't mean it and doesn't fix anything. So, yeah, I just hope that the Mayor understands the gravity of what he's done and is willing to apologise, and also it'd be good if, it'd be nice if Andrew could also tearing down the house, speak on Facebook as well, but that's really the issue for today.
Thank you, Councillor Arbery. Councillor Granger, do you wish to speak? I will speak, Councillor Clout. It's good to hear from you, Councillor Arbery, with personal relationship with Councillor Hollis. It's the first time I've heard him acknowledge that he's sorry for some of the posts that he's made. And as I've said earlier, that is reflected in the investigator's report, that this is not a code of conduct investigation into what Councillor Hollis has been doing. It's a code of conduct to deal with the Mayor. Clearly there are mitigating circumstances. I note that the investigator says by swearing in front of the TCC staff, Mayor Powell has failed to maintain the respect, and I think at some subsequent point we may look into this issue of swearing, which tends to be creeping into behaviour, and I think when we deal with it, I think you said, Councillor Robson, that we will review our own code of conduct shortly, and we may want to address that. Of course, there's all different words get used as swear words, but there are some which are particularly offensive to some, I think. I do think we have had something hanging over us as a council since the beginning. Councillor Morris, you have referred to that. The comments of Councillor Hollis prior to the election regarding his willingness to turn up at a treaty burning. In fact, you were the first to raise this when we were hearing submissions on August the 1st in regard to Mission Street. You asked Councillor Hollis straight then, was that factual and so on. And to hear today, when the Mayor in his speech to us raises the issue of what happened right there, I know that is a fact because Councillor Hollis has admitted to doing that, to being in front of the treaty documents there with a cigarette lighter. And I consider that, very, very bad behaviour the very day that we were being sworn in. So there are mitigating circumstances, and there is a cloud which some of his behaviour has brought to this. The social media posts, which are part of the report, and others, where he has gone to the media at times, particularly recently with the annual plan, where it threw the staff into a huge panic in having to address some issues ahead of time, and some of the suggestions there. But of course, none of that excuses the Mayor's behaviour, and he's admitted that. I think the current resolution in front of us is all we should do. I'm pleased that we land on this. We will request an apology, and it is entirely up to him then to follow through with that. There is no way to enforce that. I'm pleased the original motion has been amended. And to censure him is a strong statement. It's a strong resolution that it cannot happen again. And I'm happy to support that motion as it currently stands. I'll now give you a right of reply, Councillor Clout, and then we will put it to the vote.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just very quickly, look, I heartily endorse the comments that have been made, particularly by Councillors Morris and Robson and yourself, Councillor Baldock, Deputy Mayor. Look, there's a lot of Facebook posts from Andrew Hollis that I certainly don't agree with myself. But as I've said before, this is a democracy. People are free to express their own views. And there are quite a few people in the community who endorse those comments. And then others, of course, vilify Councillor Hollis for having those views. So that's the society we live in. If any elected member is offended by those comments, there's no reason why, I don't believe there's any reason why they can't bring a code of conduct complaint against Councillor Hollis at any time in the future. So that option is always there. I understand that Councillor Hollis has offered to have a drink with the Mayor just to talk over all these issues, and I would heartily recommend that the Mayor takes him up on that offer, as difficult as that might be, to swallow, pardon the pun. And just finally, I just remind ourselves that we have a beautiful city that is under an unprecedented threat, and we have to now, from this time forward, pull together as much as we can, given our differing views, but pull together united to see us through this threat and into a much brighter tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Clout. So I will now put the motion, and it is what is up there on the board. Request that the respondent make a written apology to Councillor Andrew Hollis and Councillor Dawn Kiddy, and that we write a letter of censure a letter of censure be written to the Mayor. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Any against? That is carried. I actually better just put that to a division because I didn't watch to see who said what. All those in favour, please say aye, just so I can see the hands. Yes, thank you. That is unanimous. Thank you very much. So that concludes item 10.3. I suggest we take another break here, and then the Mayor will assume the chair. We do go into public excluded now, so perhaps we take a motion for that. Thank you, Councillor Salisbury. Seconded, Councillor Hughes. All those in favour, please say aye. Against? That's carried. So we'll go into public excluded. We'll say goodbye to our hundreds of viewers. And we will be addressing the final agenda item for the remainder of this meeting. Thank you.